Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new video on the channel. Today we are going to talk about the origin and mythology of vampires. Before we get started with the video, don't forget to smash the like button, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get started. A particularly hazardous kind of being who feeds on the essential life force of humans has been the subject of legends and stories told throughout the annals of narrative history. In this day and age, people refer to them as vampires. Even though there are many different vampire legends that can be linked back to modern-day perception, it seems that the first vampires were actually a sort of revenant. This is despite the fact that modern perception can be traced back to these legends. It was common knowledge that a revenant was a foul, undead monster that was compelled to return to the world either because it had unfinished business from a previous existence or because of the horrible deeds it had perpetrated in its previous life. It was believed that the first vampires were a type of revenant that hunted down their victims, attacked them, and then drank their blood. It was believed that the first vampire had a bloated body and black features, akin to what one could anticipate from corpse in the early stages of decay. This description was based on the idea that vampires feed on human blood. It was also believed that they frequently spent the day sleeping underground in coffins, only to emerge at night to wreak havoc on their city. This was one of the theories that supported this belief. However, there were means available for locating these reprehensible creatures. The search for indications of holes above grave sites was one of the simplest things to do in the cemetery. It was speculated that these holes pointed to where a vampire had laid their head to rest. Despite the fact that the majority of what we know about vampires originates from European legend, there are references to monsters that are very similar all over the world. Hebrew and Greek mythology are home to two of the most well-known interpretations of this story. The narrative of Lilith and the Estries can be found in Hebrew mythology. Lilith is a female demon who is notorious for feeding on the blood of newborns, young children, and pregnant women. She also enjoys the taste of human flesh. She was notorious for her extreme need for blood, which earned her a great deal of fear. It was also believed that the Entries were female demons and that, in order to stay alive, they needed to feed on the blood of humans. It would appear that one of the few differences between Lilith and the Estries, other than the fact that Lilith existed as a singular entity, is that the Estries were not as selective as Lilith was when it came to selecting their victims. On the other hand, it was common knowledge that they preyed on weak-willed males who were susceptible to sexual seduction. The story of Ambrogio is told in Greek mythology. Ambrogio was a mortal man who had the terrible misfortune of seeking the same woman as Apollo, the god of the sun. Apollo was ultimately unsuccessful in his pursuit of her. He went through a lot of pain because he was so set on getting married to the woman he had been in love with his whole life, and as a result, many people believe that he turned into a vampire. As more time passed, a great number of distinct interpretations of the vampire story emerged. These would serve to mold the tale into what it is today, bringing it closer to our modern understanding. However, it wasn't until the early 1800s that the Revenant legends and the vampire legends were able to be differentiated from one another in any meaningful way. A man named John Polidori wrote a novella in 1819 that was titled The Vampire, and he published it. This work would go on to recast the way in which we understand the mythology of the vampire today. The monstrous and bloated creature that was traditionally associated with vampires was reimagined by Polidori as an elegant and alluring creature of the night. The audience was enthralled by this fresh take on vampires, which did nothing but contribute to making the beast even more menacing. The concept that an ordinary-looking man or woman, either male or female, could lure another person into becoming their victim caught on fairly quickly in many countries that had been colonized. In spite of the fact that The Vampire was the pioneering book that established the parameters for the contemporary vampire, its influence will be mostly forgotten by history. As an alternative, a lot of people are going to look to Bram Stoker's Dracula as the preferred example. It wasn't until 1897 that Dracula was published, yet the character would go on to become the most well-known vampire in history. This suggests that a significant number of Stoker's ideas originated in The Vampire. The legends of the bloated animals from early mythology have been replaced with a much more appealing and charismatic figure in contemporary folklore: the vampire. The majority of vampires are characterized as being tall, slim, and unnaturally pale. Vampires are often described as being lovely. It is well known that they suffer from a sensitivity to sunlight that is almost identical to an allergic reaction, which frequently results in death. Garlic and silver. Made products have inherent vulnerabilities that are very similar to one another. Because vampires are sensitive to the sun, it is common knowledge that they hunt at night rather than during the day. Even though vampires are able to reside in ordinary dwellings, it is nevertheless usual practice for them to sleep in coffins. This could be due to the additional protection against sunlight that coffins provide. It's common knowledge that vampires possess superhuman levels of both strength and speed. Due to the fact that they are immortal, they are one of the most dangerous predators that man has ever encountered. In light of the terrifying nature of vampires, stringent safeguards were set up to prevent the dreaded turn of the dead. It was believed that a person may become a vampire due to a number of different factors. However, the death of a particularly terrible person was the one that typically served as the most reliable warning. It would appear that the early societies had a dread that those who died having led terrible lives or who had refused to adopt religion would come back as a malevolent entity after they had passed on. It was believed that a significant number of these horrible humans would reappear as vampires. After committing acts of rebellion against the established church, people are said to have turned into vampires in many different civilizations. This was particularly supposed to be the case in Russia, where it was believed that revolting against the Russian Orthodox Church was a sure sign that a person would become an undead monster. This was thought to be the case in other countries as well. If a person was accused of practicing witchcraft, this was an even further sign that the person in question would exist as a vampire in the hereafter. It was commonly believed at that time that people who engaged in occult magic were intrinsically linked to malevolent forces, which elevated their status to that of some of the most dreaded people in society. It was also feared that corpses that had been left unprotected for an extended period of time were susceptible to being stolen. This was founded on two assumptions that were widely believed at the time. The earliest idea was that once the spirit of a person had left the body, a new host had the opportunity to use the body to interact with the living world. This view was later superseded by the belief that the spirit of a person never leaves the body. It was a common concern that an evil spirit might take possession of a deceased person's body if it had not been adequately protected before burial, or if suitable funeral rites had not been performed on the deceased person's body. It was often believed that these malevolent spirits would eventually reincarnate as vampires and launch an assault on the living. The second myth said that if a wild animal jumped over a body that was not being guarded, it might somehow bring bad luck to the body. It was believed that if an animal, particularly a dog or a cat, leaped over the body of a recently deceased corpse, the corpse would quickly transform into a vampire the following night. This was especially true for animals such as dogs and cats. It also appears that there is some sort of link between uncleanliness and the phenomenon of vampirism. During the time of the Black Plague, many uneducated people believed that vampires were responsible for spreading the disease because they returned at night to feed on the living and infect those who were still healthy. This was probably due to the fact that victims of the plague were frequently found to have blood marks around their mouths, which was something that the uninformed could easily take the wrong meaning from. That's a wrap on the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, let me know by giving it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.